Yeah, I think we'll have a few stragglers that are still coming in, but I think it's kind of given those people that were on time to get connected and have their sound on and everything. So we will get started. My name is Jackie Hobson. I am actually with the Small Business Administration. I've been with the SBA for almost 2 years. However, I'm not new to the small business space. So I've spent a career in it, both owning my own businesses and then also consulting hundreds of small businesses. So that's a little bit about me. I am new to exporting though. So I'm excited to learn as well as those who are attending this, but we do have some great experts that are in that arena. So I'll kind of introduce them to you. We have Shawn Christensen here from the World Trade Center, Utah. He is the Director of Business Outreach and Community Engagement. However, today is his last day. So we're happy that we still get to snag him and learn from his expertise. He's helped businesses of all sizes. Prior to the World Trade Center, he's been in SaaS leadership with companies. He also worked for the multimedia giant Hearst Communications in New York and Texas. So lots of experience in sales and customer success, recruiting, training, marketing, and exporting, and working with the WTC. So the WTC and the SBA work really, really close. Actually, the SBA provides the STEP grant, and they've been a great partner in distributing that. So the last 3 years, they've actually been able to distribute 319 awards, helping small businesses kind of get export ready and in that world. So after Shawn, we'll also hear from Daniel Bruner. So he is an international trade specialist with the U.S. Commercial Service Office here in Salt Lake. He's obtained a master's certificate from Thunderbird School of Global Management in International Credit and Trade Finance. And he's certified as a global credit executive. So lots of great experience there too. So I think we're all in for a treat and for our mind to kind of be like, and then we'll be able to process it. The SBA and the U.S. Commercial Services, we work really close with them. A lot of the collaboration we do are things like this, where we provide training and outreach, make sure the small businesses know where to get the help they need. I also wanted to announce that we have Patty Brewer on the line. She's actually with the Small Business Administration as well, and she is our export international trade guru. She won't be presenting today, but I did want you guys to be aware that if you have any questions on our exporting or international trade lending programs, she will be able to answer some of those questions. We have 3 different programs, the International Trade Loan Program and the Export Working Capital Program. Those can both provide funds for up to $5 million. And then we have the Export Express that allows small businesses to access about $500,000. So if you have questions in that route too, like I said, we're not doing a presentation on that, but feel free to ask them. As we move forward, I'll monitor the chat and the question and answer. If you have a question, go ahead and throw it in there and I will ask either Shawn or Daniel as we're going along. Don't worry to wait till the end. We're all comfortable taking questions throughout. So with that, I'll have Shawn take over.
Well, thanks, Jackie. I appreciate the introduction. So while today is my last day with World Trade Center, Utah, I'm not going too far. I'm actually joining the St. George Chamber of Commerce, and I've had an office here at the St. George Chamber for the past year since I've been with World Trade Center. And so I'm just moving a few doors down, and I'll still be very, very engaged with World Trade Center Utah and the SBA and the USCS. They're all fantastic partners of the chamber down here. So today's subject matter is now the world's opening up, and how do you as a business take advantage? And we're going to focus specifically on international, and now that things are starting to free up a little bit, how can you take your business international, or at least consider it, or see if your business is even a fit for international? So in preparation for today, I pulled a few statistics off of the internet. I thought, you know what, if we're saying that the world is opening up, what kind of data actually supports that? And so I went to the airline industry and took a look at our 3 big ones here in the United States, American, Delta, and United Airlines, all of whom had absolutely outstanding second quarters in 2022. And American, they saw a 12.2% increase over the same period in 2019. So in 2022, Q2, they actually brought in more revenue than they did in 2019 pre-pandemic. And that's with 8.5% less flights. And so their capacity's down, but their revenues are up. Delta, they reported that they've exceeded 2019 in both Latin and transatlantic flights. And that's driven a lot by flights to Korea and to Australia. The reopening of those markets also in Japan has driven a lot of that behavior. So we can see that the world is starting to open up. And United Airlines, they reported 12.1 billion for Q2, which is the most that they've reported in revenue in over a decade for a quarter. So taking a look just simply at the airlines, we're able to see that the world really is starting to open up and restrictions are starting to be loosened up. And so now's a great time to take a look at international, and let's talk about why you might do that. So, we went one too far. There we go. So Fujio Matari, he used to be the CEO of Canon. And his quote that I pulled for today is, "Diversification and globalization are keys to the future." He said this long ago, and it has not changed. In 2022, it still remains the same. We are a global economy. And so taking advantage of that is something that every business is going to have to take a look at some point. And I'm going to give you guys some questions to ask and some things to consider when you're considering international. But in times of recession, the United States International Trade Commission found that businesses are far more resilient during an economic downturn, and they grow faster when they are exporting outside of their domestic market. Now, this was done in 2008, 2009, so during the Great Recession. And you know, there's a lot of talk about the recession that either we're in or we're not in. They can't decide, right? They continue to change the definition. But Steve Hanke, who is a professor of applied economics at Johns Hopkins University, said he is saying that come in 2023, we're going to fall into a recession. And the reason he gives for that is that we've had 5 months of zero M2 growth. Now, when I read that, I thought to myself, gosh, there's a lot smarter people than me that know what M2 means, but I do not. So I looked up the definition for that. And M2 growth, M2 is a measure of the US money stock that includes M1, which is currency and coins held by non-bank public, and checkable deposits and traveler's checks. If people still do traveler's checks, I don't know if they do, but and then you also add in savings deposits, including money in market deposit accounts, and small time deposits under $100,000. So taking a look at that, it's been down or shown zero growth for the last 5 months. And then we've also had a money supply growth, and with money supply growth and M2 being down, he says that rolling into 2023 recession is really unavoidable. So if that indeed is true, taking a look at your business and saying, how do we prepare and how do we insulate ourselves or insure ourselves against this recession and making sure we're recession proof. And one thing to think about with that is taking your business international, making sure that all your eggs are not just here in the domestic basket, but that they spread those around internationally. And small businesses in Utah, they account for 85% of our exporters. And so if you're sitting on this call and you're like, gosh, I have a small business, I don't know if this really applies to me, it does. And trust me, I've met over the last year with World Trade Center Utah, I've met hundreds of businesses that are doing super cool things all over Southern Utah. And you may have never heard of them. And they're exporting and they're doing business offshore and onshore. And there are these international businesses that you may not even be familiar with. One that comes to mind is Forward Motion. They're the largest custom orthotics manufacturer in the United States. And they're right here in St. George, Utah, in the old industrial park in St. George, Utah. They've grown so fast and so big that they can no longer fit into their warehouse. And they're building another location out in Washington. But here they are they're the largest custom orthotics manufacturer, and they're right in St. George. and they're international to the hilt. We work with them over at World Trade Center, Utah, fantastic business. So when you're considering international, three things that you want to ask yourself is this: number one, is there an international market for my business? Now, when you ask yourself that question, there's certain things you're going to want to look at. Number one, my ideal customer, do they exist within other countries? And if they do exist in other countries, how many of them are actually there? And so taking a look at that country and saying that ideal customer, which would also include a person who has the income to purchase the product that you would be exporting, do they exist in these countries, and which countries do they exist in? Also, what sales are you getting today that are actually coming in from international sources? Now, some businesses, they'll get international interest, but they're just not set up to meet it. Others, they'll take and they'll ship their product out to them only to be surprised, or their consumers surprised when they go to pick it up, let's say in Spain, and you ship your product there, and then they get a thing in the mail that says, hey, we've got your product here at the post office or at UPS, and you can come pick it up. It's going to cost you an extra $70. And next thing you know, they're paying the duties and tariffs, and he had no idea that was going to happen. And so taking a look at where sales interest is coming from today is another way to look and say, hey, is there some international interest out there? And then also thinking to yourself, am I going business to business? Am I direct to consumer? Am I using the distributor model? Usually what you're doing for yourself here in the United States, here domestically, is a similar model that you're going to use internationally. Not always, but it is something to consider. And do I have distributors from other countries that are interested? Now, one thing to note here is that just because there's been some interest from other countries does not necessarily mean that's the country you need to grow into. And we'll get into that more in just a moment. But that is an indicator that there is interest there, and it is a country that you should take a look at. Okay, so after you take a look and say, are we an international business? Do we have an opportunity to be international? And is there some interest out there? What resources do I have available that can make us successful? And things to consider here are grants. And Jackie mentioned a moment ago the STEP grant. And I'm gonna get into that in detail in a moment here. We're fortunate enough over at World Trade Center, Utah, to be the administrator for the state STEP grant for the state of Utah. And the SBA has been kind enough to entrust us with that. And we've been the administrator for several years now, and every single year we get more money. So stay tuned and I'll tell you guys more about that. But these grant funds, they can help offset that cost. Also, Jackie mentioned earlier, there's specific loans that are available through the SBA to help with international growth. And there's services like at the USCS to be able to help you with international growth and being able to analyze markets and see where you go. At World Trade Center, Utah, we also are a resource for that. So also another thing to look at is language competencies within your company. So we have the advantage here in Utah of having many people who are bilingual or trilingual. And so when you're taking a look at your company and the language competencies that exist there, this also can help you determine what countries might be a good fit for you. If you have people who are speaking Spanish, looking at Latin speaking countries, that's a great place to start. And then also, are you doing this online, or are you going to need a brick and mortar? These are all things to consider as you're considering, should I be taking my business international? And then the final question is you need to ask your management team, you need to ask your executive team, how committed are they to being international? Because it's not inexpensive. There are costs associated to that. Fortunately, in Utah, we have ways to help offset that cost, but there still is going to be a financial commitment on behalf of your company. Do you have the staff available that you're going to be able to allocate to the effort? Because it doesn't just happen. And if you don't have the staff available, that doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that you're going to use some outsourced sources to help make that happen. And then, are you available for travel? Because there's trade shows and there's trade missions you're going to do. You never want to do business in the country until you've gone there and visited that country and met people face to face. And I'm saying in a big way, when you're committing to a country, you're going to want to go to that country, visit that and be able to establish relationships. And there's some opportunities that we have to be able to make that happen for you. Now I did the 3 questions you need to ask yourself. Here are 3 steps that are key to being an international company. Number 1 is you need to make your decisions based on data. You can't go by gut. You might get lucky if you go by gut, but we all know that international is an expensive venture. And so using data to make a correct decision is the smartest way to go about it. Don't use emotion, don't use guesswork. What you want to do is identify what are the key data points that we need to focus on in order to decide what country to go into. And then you need access to that data. If you have internal resources to be able to pull the data on your own, that's fantastic. If you've got analysts and you're able to put together your own algorithm and prioritize, everyththing from the economic stability of a country, as well as the stability of their monetary system, or the political situation and geopolitics that are involved there, regulatory wise, how friendly is that country to do business with? Surprisingly, Canada is a lot of place where we grow into a lot, but they have a lot of regulations in place because they want to protect Canada from being overtaken by United States businesses. And so regulatory wise, it's a difficult country to grow into. Brazil is also notoriously difficult to grow into because of regulations and some existing corruption. But these are all things to take into consideration and be able to weigh whether a country is the best fit for you or not. And then once you've narrowed it down, we recommend that you narrow it down to 2 countries. You start with a list of 10, and from that 10, you're going to pick 2 countries that are going to be your best countries to grow into. What we found is that if you try to grow into more than 2 countries in a year, you are destined to fail, because unless you have a lot of resources, both financial and human capital, to be able to allocate to that, it can get really, really difficult because you're just spread too thin. So once you've decided on those 2 countries, now you need to put a plan together. We've all heard the saying, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. We all agree with that. However, we also get excited when we take a look and say, oh my gosh, England's going to be this fantastic country to go into. Let's go, without putting a plan together. And so we highly recommend that you take time to put a plan together that addresses everything from what are you going to do from marketing to what's going to be your market entry method, back to, are you going direct to consumer? Are you going to build a brick and mortar? Are you going to do it online? Are you going to use a distributor? And then what you also want to include in that plan is detail out a timeline. We all know that needs to be a fluid situation because not everything goes according to plan, but having an initial timeline in that go-to-market plan is going to be essential to your success. And then the third step is you actually move on to execution. Have KPIs in place, know what your goals are and your timelines are, and then actually start engaging with buyers and possible distributors. What does your outreach plan look like? Are you reaching out to them electronically? Are you looking for warm introductions? Are you traveling to the market? And this is something I'll just touch on quickly here is that at World Trade Center Utah, we sponsor a lot of major trade shows and trade missions throughout the world. And if you are interested in the country, reaching out to us and asking, hey, do you guys have a trade show that we could attend in Paris? Or is there, or just a trade show that is just applicable to your particular industry? Or is there a trade mission plan? For example, we're leaving, I think it is next week, and going to be traveling with Governor Cox to the UAE and Israel on a trade mission. And what's neat about that is we're able to help open doors with the power of Governor Cox's office, with the state seal of Utah, and with the power of World Trade Center Utah. We can open doors that generally are very hard for you to open on your own. As you look at this, this is just the small list that I put together of things that could cost you money when you go international. Everything from consultants to export training to legal fees and regulatory fees, to an important one is protecting your intellectual property. There are countries that are well known for duplicating your product, and there are legal measures in place to be able to protect yourself from that, but costs associated to that, everything from transportation and meeting space when you're in country to the actual travel itself, your airline and your hotel, there can become a lot of costs that are associated to going international. But don't worry, there's an opportunity to help offset the cost of that. And that's where the STEP grant comes in. And I'm going to focus on STEP grant today because, as I mentioned earlier, the SBA has chosen us as the administrator for the state of Utah. And this past year, we had over $1 million to give back to Utah businesses. And interestingly enough, if you take a look over the last several years, we've had a major increase in funds available to businesses year over year over year. And that's because we are very aggressive at making sure that these funds don't end up sitting in our bank account non-distributed. We make sure that we exhaust all of these funds every year. And so these awards are given on a per activity basis, and your activities can go back to these costs that come up here. Certain ones of these can be covered by STEP grant funds. Other ones cannot, like legal fees. You can't use STEP grant funds to cover legal fees. But you can use STEP grant funds to use international consultants or in-country consultants. You can use STEP grant funds to pay for export training. There's a fantastic course that's at Salt Lake Community College. That's kind of I forget what the name is of it is off the top of my head, but it's like an exporting or international business 101. But it's an after hours certificate that you can get. I attended the class. It was fantastic. It opened my eyes to everything it takes to be an international business. But you can use STEP grant funds to help pay for that. The neat thing is that you can apply several times throughout the year for different activities. So there might be a trade show that you're going to that has international implications. And so in order to get out to that trade show, there's going to be costs associated, and you can use STEP grant funds to help cover those costs. But you might get $4,000 or $5,000. Well, you can receive up to $15,000 a year. So you can apply for STEP grant funds throughout the year until you receive that maximum of $15,000. And the application, it really is very simple. I put 40 minutes on here. That's actually generous. I think most of the people I've worked with over the last year have been able to fill it out in 25 to 30 minutes. It's the more detail you put in about your activity, the better. That's the one insight I'll give you. And I'll give you some contact information for someone who can help you with this if you guys are interested in STEP grant funds. But everybody who's on this call that owns a small business, I highly recommend that after this, you apply for a STEP grant. You decide on an activity or give us a call and talk with us about it. We'll help you figure it out. There are rules behind this, and that list of rules is here that your business has to qualify for in order to be eligible for STEP grant funds. We're not going to review all of this today. What I'll do is after this, for everybody who's registered for our webinar, we'll send this presentation out. And last but not least, I think I'm almost right on time here, Dan, is this is the contact information. Callie Forsyth, she's an absolutely tremendous resource. She's my peer up in northern Utah, and her contact information is here. Like I say, I'll be sending this out. There's a link down here below. If you just want to chat with her about what opportunities may exist out there for you, you can click on this link right here and be able to actually book time on her calendar so that you guys can connect. You don't even have to email her or call her. You can simply click on that and schedule time directly on her calendar. So I'll make sure that this is accessible to all of you. Now, there's one thing. Any business that decides international is a good fit for me, I want to protect myself against a recession. I want to diversify my business. I want to take advantage of the fact that 90% of consumers exist outside of the United States. When you make that decision, online is going to be an absolute must for your business. And so we're fortunate enough today to have Dan Bruner from the USCS, who is an expert on all things international, but has prepared a presentation where he's going to take you through things that you're going to want to consider when taking your business international as it pertains to online. So Dan, I'll hand the time over to you, and let me escape out of there and stop sharing my screen, and I'll let you take over.
Thank you so much. As I'm setting up this right now, I just want to say it's an honor and a privilege to be a part of one of your last official webinars with World Trade Center, Utah. So this will be in memoriam for me.
Well, I appreciate that. We'll have to combine power and do some presentations down here in the St. George area.
Absolutely. Can everybody see the screen? If I did that correctly. Okay, good. You mentioned earlier that course with SLCC. That's the Executive Certificate of Global Business Management. I only know that offhand because I'm going to be teaching one of the days. The deadline has passed for this month, but they will be doing another one most likely in spring. So you should definitely check that out. As Jackie mentioned, my name is Dan Bruner, and I'm an international trade specialist with the U.S. Commercial Service. We are the export promotion arm of the United States Department of Commerce, and our mission is to help American companies like yours expand internationally. We do that utilizing a network of specialists in over 80 countries worldwide, located in the embassies and consulates that will render the services that I here in the U.S. field will tee up for them. I'm part of CS Utah, which covers Utah, but we have over 100 cities. We have over 100 offices nationwide, helping American companies understand the export process, set up B2B matchmaking, due diligence on foreign parties, and commercial and advocacy and diplomacy. But today, I'm going to be talking to you about digital strategy. So the agenda for today will be to cover a B2B e-commerce overview, B2B and B2C, 5 steps to a digital strategy, website globalization review, gap analysis, which is covered by a STEP grant, and online resources for your digital strategy. Getting started, it helps to have a baseline understanding of the e-commerce sales flow. There are two, there's the B2B and B2C. The B2B sales flow is as follows: manufacturer to distributor wholesaler, and thus on to the enterprise retail business. And B2C is from the retailer to the consumer. It's worth noting that both B2B and B2C can have an e-commerce presence. They operate a little bit differently, but they both do have e-commerce applications. The major point I want you to take home today, if you take home just one, is that e-commerce is growing. E-commerce will comprise about 25% of global retail sales by 2024, or $7 trillion in overall sales. So let's take a look at that. As you can see, right in the middle of this chart, we had a big event, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with, the pandemic. Prior to that, e-commerce had been growing in market share of global retail sales at a very good clip. But the pandemic set that into overdrive, whereas prior it was a supplemental sales channel. Now companies were seeing it more as their major client-focused sales channel. And this translates incredibly well, especially to rural companies. E-commerce is a great tool to get your product or service in front of potential clients, even when you are in areas that don't have as much access as the major urban areas. Post-pandemic, we see up to the year 2024 forecast of at least 2% gains year on year in this taking of the market share of global retail. Let's look at the major sectors that do the best in e-commerce. These are fashion, electronics and media, toys, hobbies, and DIY, furniture and appliances, and food and personal care. We can see at the 5-year span between 2020 and 2025, a projected 8% growth in these top sectors. Looking at each sector individually, we'll see that a post-pandemic forecast of them has 20% growth across the board, perhaps even more than that in the food and personal care area. Oh. Moving on to our closest trade allies, Mexico and Canada, we see that for these top sectors, there's a projected increase by the year 2025 at 5.5% in Mexico and 6.2% in Canada. Also domestically, we are increasing at 5.5%, and we lead amongst the USMCA countries by far in e-commerce. Moving on to B2B, we can see a projection of gross merchandise value by the year 2025 at 17%. So in both B2B and B2C, we are growing. So taking that into consideration, how does your company get a piece of that pie? Well, you may need to internationalize your website, make it more appealing, more searchable by international consumers. There are three major strategies for doing this. The first is called internationalization. This is the least expensive. And in this, your website is optimized to be culturally neutral, and it can facilitate smooth translation through programs such as Google Translate. Regionalization is a mid-range investment, and your website is purposely built for a particular region, but not a specific country. And then localization, which is the highest level of investment. Your website is specifically focusing on attracting visitors from a particular country. So to put simply, you can internationalize your website by adding a machine translation bar like Google Translate, or doing things that could appeal to anybody from any country. That a best practice, for example, is just by saying we are open to international inquiries. Here is an email specific to international inquiries. That can immediately tell somebody without a doubt, okay, they're interested in exporting. Now I know this is an exporter. Regionalization could be having your website translated into Arabic, for example, to appeal to the Middle East, but not specifically to the United Arab Emirates or the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Localization would specifically focus on one of those countries. Here are some of the top e-commerce business issues that we can help with. These are the most common things that we hear. Lack of business digital strategy and experience. We can provide you with counseling on digital strategy. And a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today would be some of the things that we would talk about in a session on digital strategy. Lack of e-commerce service provider awareness. We have a business service provider list, BSP list. These are companies that we have vetted and can confirm that they are legitimate companies. They do what they say that they can do. A lot of times when you are, especially a small business, just starting out with e-commerce, you don't have an IT department. You would outsource to other companies for those solutions. We have a list of companies we can provide you for free. Or you're welcome to use your own companies that you're aware of. It's just an additional resource for you. Help identify non-tariff barriers and shipping and logistics costs. These are things that come up even outside of e-commerce as part of our traditional counseling, but they are more often we are seeing them in e-commerce discussions. These are things that we can help you with. And finally, online payment solutions. This goes back to the BSP list, but it's probably the number one request. How do I turn my website into an e-commerce platform? How do I have a checkout on the website? A service provider can provide that for you. Moving on to the digital strategy. It always helps to have a plan before you get started. And Shawn was talking about those 3 questions earlier, and that sounds a lot like an export plan. Well, this is a plan for your digital strategy. There are 5 steps to this. Define your digital objectives, check your website and SEO for a foreign audience, address back-end digital infrastructure, choose e-commerce channels, and establish KPIs. So the first one, define digital objectives. What do you want your website to do? Who do you want to find your website and use it? What features do you want to have on? It's a really good idea to build a map for yourself by answering these questions so that all the other steps can refer back to your one goal, but your your goals of answering these questions. Next, check website and SEO for foreign audience. You have a website now, but is it effectively reaching the audience that you want it to? What's stopping you? Are you not using the right keywords? Are you having metadata issues that will prevent a web crawler from finding your website so that your international audience cannot find it? These are a lot of problems that we can help with through the WGR that I'll talk about in a few moments. Address backend digital infrastructure. Okay, so you've identified the audience and you know how you can reach them, but do you have the capabilities to perform? This is where the BSP list would come into use. You might need to commission a company to set up an e-commerce platform for you, an API, for example, so that you can sell as a point of sale on your website. Choose e-commerce channels. There are 4 of them. There's your own website, social media. There are other companies as well, a third party, for example. And then there are e-commerce platforms like eBay, Amazon. So decide what percentage you want to focus on each of those channels. And finally, KPIs. So you've done all the changes, but was it worth it? Are you effectively enacting change for your website? It's a good idea to establish a key performance indicator to show you how your investment has translated into real dollars for your company. Is your website reaching an international audience? Well, to answer that, I'd first like to explain how a search engine works. So we have the internet, and an antiquated term for this is the World Wide Web. I think we all remember that. What do we have on a web? We have spiders. These are not the kind of spiders that will crawl all over you. No, these are lines of code. They're called an algorithm. The web crawler, its job, it's programmed to go out into the internet and to crawl, to find new websites. Okay, it will look at a website, it'll jot down information, just kind of like a library card. It's looking for specific things. And it will take that information and bring it back to the search engine. The search engine, using that as a tool, will then create its product, which are listings. So essentially, it's a very simplistic way for a simplistic explanation of how a search engine works. And for this example, I used Google, but there are other search engines as well, Bing, Yahoo. In certain regions, there's Baidu in China, Naver in South Korea. But I hope this is still true. I heard this, that still 90% of web traffic, over 90%, goes through Google. And in fact, these other search engines have taken Google's algorithm and tweaked it a little, just found what they wanted to get out of it and made their own algorithm. But it's important to understand that Google still reigns supreme, and that optimizing your site for Google's web crawler might be the most efficient in the short term. But let's take an example of the web crawler finding your website. Okay, remember, it's looking for data, it's looking for keywords, it's looking for specific things. If you have, for example, on your website a picture of a tree, unfortunately, it doesn't have eyes, so it can't see that tree like you or I could. So it's looking for something else. It's looking for alt text. This is information that you would associate with the image of the tree, just for the sake of that web crawler. So here we have attached to this image of the tree on your website, the alt text, Western Douglas fir softwood tree used in the building industry. Now the web crawler can accurately crawl your site. It's not missing any information because it sees that there is this image here, and okay, now I know what it is. Goes back to the search engine and reports, and your authority, your domain authority on that subject has just gone up a little bit. So if you don't, If you don't have the image alt text there, that's what's called a metadata issue, and that could prevent your website from being crawled the way it should. Fortunately, we have a service with the U.S. Commercial Service called the Website Globalization Review Gap Analysis. I'm going to call it WGR from here on out. The WGR will identify those areas that need improvement, the metadata issues, your keywords, are they the most optimized for you? We provide you with 2 SEO web crawls, Moz and SEO Site Checkup, so you can get an idea of how these different web crawlers see your website and triangulate the problems. As I mentioned before, this can come off the STEP grant, which Shawn was talking about earlier. And we also will advise you on the BSP listings, any companies that might make sense for you for the changes that the report suggests. Moving on, I'd like to talk about resources, and this is the final section. On our website, trade.gov/e-commerce, we have the first resource here is the Frontline Library. These are bite-sized articles about SEO, best practices for digital strategy. A lot of the things that I talked about today are here too. But what's interesting is this is also kind of a practice what we preach section. So these articles are written in a way to be easily crawled by web crawlers. So not only are you learning while reading these, but you can also get a good idea of what makes a good, well-written SEO copy. This, please feel free to take a look at this. Also on our site is links to market research, which is available for you. Here we have STEP Grant, MBDA, Tech Initiative, the Rural Business E-Commerce Assistance Center. We just have a lot of links to topics such as GDPR, non-tariff trade barriers, unfair practices, taxes, and so forth. Next, this is a newer feature. This is the Digital Policy Alert, and this is in conjunction with the University of St. Gallen. And it's just a tracker of anything cross-border digital commerce that might be pertinent information for you. So a really good idea to keep getting updated through this. Next is our market diversification tool. And this exists even outside of e-commerce, but especially applies here. This tool will allow you to input your zip code for your company, your HS code for your product, and then also what countries you're already exporting to. The output would be a list that is ranked by the most opportune markets for you. There's different criteria like the GDP of that country. Is there a free trade agreement with them? Distance between your company and that country. Is there political risk, and so on. Takes all this into consideration and then outputs some countries for you to focus on. So let's say that the market diversification tool shows you that India is a really good opportunity market for you. Well, that can inform you for your digital strategy. Maybe I need to be focusing on at least regionalizing my website for South Asia, or perhaps I need to get a human translated page into another language, Hindi, for example. So finally, the e-commerce research guide. So every year, our specialists around the world create country commercial guides. We have these for over 140 countries. These cover information like the top markets, top prospects for US industry in that country. What are the regulations to sell there? What documents you need? There's also an e-commerce section in each one. Through this link here on our trade.gov/e-commerce site, we have, for ease of use, links directly to the e-commerce section. So you can just search for e-commerce in over 100 countries. And finally, I'd like to mention a few other programs that we have under our umbrella here in the U.S. Commercial Service. Global Diversity Export Initiative, Women's Global Trade Empowerment, Climate and Clean Tech Solutions, Rural Export Center. We have a variety of resources. If you're an underserved community or if you are industry focused, these could be links to education or market research, which could be readily available. So please feel free to take a look at these as well. And with that, I would like to conclude my presentation today on digital strategy in the WGR, and I'm looking forward to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shawn, again. Yeah, so we have that question and answer box. Go ahead and put any questions you have there. I have a question because I said, I'm learning with all of you. If I say I was looking for a buyer and someone reaches out to me, how do I know that that's like a legitimate company if I'm doing some B2B sales? Maybe Dan, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. So we do have a service called the International Company Profile, and this is focusing on background information on a foreign company. A lot of times small businesses, they don't have the resources that larger ones do, that they don't have an office in every market, for example. So instead they could lean upon us. We have staff at the embassies and consulates. They're called foreign commercial specialists. They speak the local language, they know the market. So this is part and parcel for the tasks that they do. We have the International Company Profile has two different versions, a full and a partial. The major difference there is that in the full version, they will actually do a site visit. But in both versions, they will look into financials about the company. They will look into potential red flags, like lawsuits against the company, lawsuits against stakeholders. They'll check with references. They'll have an interview with company stakeholders, employees, and they will provide a report to you. And you can then use that information to make an educated decision on if you want to work with that company or not.
What I think is awesome about that, Dan, is I think a lot of times businesses in Utah, they'll get interest from an international source, and they don't know these people. They've probably never met them before, and sometimes they don't even know how they got their information. And being able to lean on you guys for that is, I just think, a tremendous resource to give them peace of mind of who they're doing business with.
And that's
Absolutely
important in the scammer industry too, right? Like you said, Shawn, how do you even get my information, right? Yeah. When I'm being more proactive and I'm going out and I'm trying to maybe find a market versus, someone randomly reaches out to me, is there data out there that small businesses can reach to kind of decide what would be the best market to go after, or where an opportunity is? You guys can both take a stab at it. Shawn, you want to go first?
Yeah, so, I mean, when you're looking at these markets, my biggest thing, and the thing I think that businesses need to look the most at is what does their ideal customer profile look like? It's surprising to me how many businesses I've talked to who've never sat down and really mapped that out. If you went to Nike, they actually have avatars up around their office that are like, Mike the accountant and Jackie the athlete, and they've got these actual people up around the office that are their ideal customer profiles to help them be able to focus on how do we develop the right product for them and how do we market correctly to them. So sitting down and figuring out what is the age range, what is the gender, what is the income range, understanding what are their buying habits, putting that information together, and the more detail you can put behind it, the better. And by the way, you can always Google it and find many ideal customer profiles that have been built by a lot of different companies that will really get you the level of detail you should have. I think that's the first step to figuring out whether you should go international or not. Because if that individual exists in another country and they exist there in abundance, then you should be looking at that country and going after it. Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember what you just said. With the radio stations used to do the same thing, when they would create a profile of the ideal listener, and then they'd say, how do we market to this person? Well, just like that, your company will want to do the same. How do you get that information? There's primary and secondary information. Primary is very costly, where you would commission a report, for example, on this. But really, that's the best solution for you, because that report is catered to your product exactly. There's also secondary information, anything you can find from a report that was already made, which could apply to your product or service as well. And so that's a lesser investment. You might need to pay Statista, Euromonitor, for example, for something that they've already reported on. But you may need to use a combination of both primary and secondary data to make that decision on where you should export to. Who are you looking to find in that country? Is there going to be a good demographic for your product or service there?
Yeah. Jackie, I have a question for you. So let's say that I'm a business that's interested in international, and I see the STEP grant. I'm like, hey, that's great. I can apply for some of that. But let's say I need some significant funds to go after that. What step should they take in order to get access to the SBA funding that you talked about earlier? Do they call you at the SBA directly, or do you guys send them to the financial institutions? Like, what's their first step?
Yeah, I'll let Patty jump on for this. I do know, because she will work directly with companies as well, kind of like the Small Business Development Center does. So if you're not aware as a small business of the Small Business Development Center or the Women's Business Center, that's also a great place to start, because as in any funding, you're going to need to get a business plan in order, right? You're going to need relationships with your lenders already. So those are important steps to do. But then I know Patty has also worked one-on-one with companies when they kind of have their business plan ready. And then now we're going to look at it and tweak it for, how can we help internationally, for like an international specific business plan and what that would look like. Patty, are you on still?
I'm here. Yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, once the business plan is written, and you've incorporated all the information you've gotten from Shawn's team and from Dan's team, then you want to start looking for a lender. And if you have a lender already, that's probably your best first step. But the most important thing you want to do is start talking to that lender, show them your business plan, start working with them, develop that relationship. And there was an article that came out mid-COVID that talked about companies that were surviving COVID the best already had established relationships with their lenders. And so start that relationship, start that conversation with your lender. If you don't have a lender, I'm happy to make some references for you. But really, you do want to start that conversation and figure out what are the lender's specific requirements when they're looking at offering business loans. What kind of ratios are they looking at? What information do they want in your business plan? Do they want you to forecast out 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? You want to understand what their data requirements are as well.
Awesome. And I think a great thing, Patty, and you could stay on, is when maybe they're thinking about exporting and they have a bank that they're not used to, maybe they're only used to 7As, but the SBA has a lot of other great programs. They can easily reach out to our office and we can help them. We have Dawn on staff, or Patty, tell them how maybe you could help connect them to maybe a bank that's more comfortable with the business that's looking at doing exporting.
I can certainly do that. The SBA has a really strong database of lenders, and I can look and see which lenders have participated the most in our export financing. And so I can certainly hook you up with maybe 3 or 4 lenders, and you can go and talk to them. Or if your lender has faith in you and really does want to support you, and they just need to understand the programs a little bit better, I can also do some lender training for you. So I can work with your lender to get them comfortable with the program.
2 things I take away from your responses is, one thing, the first thing is like businesses aren't on their own to figure this out. And I believe it's ingrained in our culture here in Utah that if I work really hard and do what's right, it'll all work out. And a lot of times in thinking that, we end up foregoing the resources that are just sitting there waiting to help us, right? And so people need to take advantage of those resources. The second thing I learned is that Patty by far has the best background of all of us on this call today. I think that's awesome. All the artwork behind you. It's a pretty cool background, Patty.
Thank you.
Well, are there any, I haven't seen any other questions come through here, Jackie?
Yeah, no, and I'll just second what Shawn said. Utah's a great place. We're very collaborative. I know Dan said, hey, if you take away anything from this, take away this, right? My thing that I'm going to tell you, if you're taking one thing away from this meeting, is just remember our name or our organization. Because if you reach out to us, if you reach out to the SBA or US Commercial Services, World Trade Center, and maybe it wasn't the first step that you were supposed to take, and you were maybe supposed to get help from someone else, we're going to make sure whatever you need, we direct you to the right resource partner or the right individual, because like I said, we're collaborative. We really know each other well, and we want to help you succeed. So that would be my takeaway is if you get overwhelmed, if you don't know, just reach out and ask one of us, and we'll be able to get an answer or a person for you.
Absolutely.
And I think with that, yeah, we'll close up about a minute early, but thank you all for jumping on. Thank you, Shawn. Thank you, Dan and Patty as well. So
Thanks, everybody. Thanks,
Thank
Jack.
you.
See you later.
bye.